You go ahead, get yourself a number one wide receiver in Kenny Golladay. They didn't let him out of their sights after he left Chicago. A lot of people thought he was going to sign with the Bears. Goes to the Giants, has that meeting. They don't let him out of their sight. He signs with them. They also get a Dory Jackson. You re-sign Leonard Williams, Nate Solder, and then you take chances on a Kyle Rudolph and a John Ross. I mean, there are a lot of weapons for Daniel Jones to play with now, and I think they weren't able to get Leonard Floyd. I think that's the one thing. They didn't get another edge pass rusher. I'm sure they would have wanted to continue shoring up the defensive line and giving that defense more firepower. But for the most part, Chris, I got to say, with these moves, the New York Giants, at this point, if you're asking me to pick a team to win the NFC East right now, I had to put money on the line, I'd have to go with the Giants, just considering they've been able to retool, especially on offense. That was the one thing. And I think it helps with guys like Slayton and Shepard. They can now be more complementary pieces. They don't have to be the number one wide receiver, those guys on the outside that have to make plays consistently. I have to think that right now the Giants are at the forefront in terms of being the team picked to win the NFC East.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what's remarkable from Dave Gettleman is not only did he shore up a lot of needs, but he did so with barely any cap room.
Yeah.
And it was pretty remarkable. Obviously, they had to let go of Kevin Zeitler to do so, but they're able to restructure Nate Solder's contract and figure it out from there. But in terms of the NFC East, yeah, I would still pick it hurts me to believe in the Cowboys, but I think I might still pick the Cowboys because they do have the best quarterback. But they do have the worst coach of the three options too. So, we'll see how that one plays out. But obviously they were doing very well before the Dak injury, and they even did okay with Andy Dalton in there. Not fantastic, obviously. And now they pay Dak the big bucks. So they're probably expecting to be, honestly, the favorites in this division after what they just paid Dak Prescott. But back to the Giants, yeah, I think that Kenny Golladay and Kyle Rudolph are really great for that offense because it gives you two veteran presence pieces who can still catch the ball. Kyle Rudolph, obviously, on the very tail end of his career now, will be more of a locker room guy, but still a guy who can make a catch and be a red zone threat. Kenny Golladay is a great receiver. He really is. And I've seen a lot of Plexico and Eli comparisons, and I'm not a Giants fan, but you have to hope that this is anywhere near Plexico and Eli because that ended in a game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. So it was a good offseason. I think that the defense still has some question marks, but to me, the biggest question mark still is the draft because we've seen Dave Gettleman have good off seasons in terms of free agency and draft really poorly. So we'll see who they get at 12, I believe it is. No, 11.
11. The Eagles are now at 12.
12 is in my head for the trades. 11. We'll see who they get at 11. I would say either an edge rusher or an offensive lineman would be the two biggest needs right now. But this is the guy who drafted running back at 2. So we'll see.
Yeah, here's my thing with the other two teams in contention in the NFC East. I'm not even going to say the Philadelphia Eagles because we all know they are in the midst of a tank job, and it better work because if it doesn't, we're going to riot. But I digress. Just moving on to Washington and Dallas. Dallas, yes. If you look on paper, that offense is loaded, and with Dak Prescott under center, they should be the favorites. But that defense, to me, they were awful last year. They didn't do much to shore it up in free agency. A lot of people think they're going to draft Patrick Surtain out of Alabama for the secondary, but still, I don't see that defense being nearly as good or catching up to the production that their offense will give them. And for Washington, I think inversely, you can say the same thing. I mean, their defense is really, really good, but offensively, are you really going to bank on Ryan Fitzpatrick to take you to the playoffs, to take you to the promised land? And if not him, Taylor Heineke, who my dad still, he called him Heineken for the whole entire time he saw that game against the Bucks. My dad loves Heineken, his favorite beer. And now Taylor Heineke, one of his favorite players. But is my dad going to put his hopes and dreams in him? I think not. So for the Giants, that defense, it's already built in place. I mean, obviously they wanted to add more to it, but it showed last year in stretches that they got stronger as the season progressed. And I think for me, Chris, the biggest question or the pressure is now on Daniel Jones. You have pieces to work with this season. This offense should be in the top half as far as efficiency, production in the red zone. If Saquon is back at 100, and now you add Kenny Golladay, it's going to make life even that much easier for guys like Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard to get theirs as well. I just have to think if Daniel Jones is still turning the ball over, making mistakes, and this offense is sluggish and struggling throughout, and this team finishes below 500, and let's say the division is bad again where they finish below 500 and they're still a game or two out from winning the division, I have to think if Daniel Jones can't get it done with this unit this year and he looks like he's regressed at any point, I have to think then that he's on the clock and Gettleman's on the clock as far as where they're going to go with their quarterback position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because the Giants have a better offense than Washington on paper, but a worse offense than Dallas. They have a better defense than Dallas and a worse defense than Washington. So where does kind of that middle ground put them in relation to the other two teams on a whole? They have a great coach. I think that is something we saw last year, and that's going to help them a lot in this race. I think that this draft is huge for all three of these teams because there's clear needs on all of them. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick really could use another weapon down in Washington. They're 19th or 20th.
Yeah.
You mentioned the needs on all defensive positions, front seven, back seven, however you want to break it up. They need a player at all 11 positions and on defense in Dallas. And they could certainly pick one up there. All three of them draft in the top 20. So I think this is going to be a very interesting draft for these three teams. But as for Daniel Jones, you're 100% right because I just mentioned in the open, we're dealing with the same thing with Sam Darnold right now. Going into the third year, there were expectations, not this high, not win the division high because the team was still terrible and the coach was still an abomination and whatever. But expectations to be better than he was the first 2 years. And Sam Darnold was not as better than he was the first 2 years last year. He got hurt again. And now he's probably halfway out the door, despite being drafted third overall 3 years ago. Are you going to see the same thing with Daniel Jones now? It's good. It's possible. My question is an 8-8 division championship enough for Dave Gettleman or his replacement if he ends up getting fired or retiring or whatever it is? Is an 8-8 division championship against a bad Cowboys team and a not so great WFT, and they just kind of like work their way to 8-8 with a couple out of division wins and then get shelled by whoever it is, whether it's Seattle or Green Bay in the first round? Is that enough to believe in Daniel Jones? Are you going to go to the playoffs? Now you're drafting 18th, 19th, 20th overall. You don't have the option now to draft a quarterback at number 2. So is that then good enough to believe in Daniel Jones, pick up the 5th-year option, and then pay him $30 million in 2 years? I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough, man, because for the Giants, I mean, 8-8, that's going to win you the NFC East. It looks like we're not sure how many leaps and bounds the division is going to take if the winner is going to be 12-4, 13-3. Don't know if that's the case. Very well could be. You never know with how a team starts and finishes throughout a season. But for the Giants, I mean, you drafted up to get Daniel Jones. You made this decision if you're Gettleman. You know, this was not something, nobody put a gun to your head and said, you have to draft this guy here. You made the conscious decision to go up. You believed in Daniel Jones. You took a shot on him. So if it doesn't work now with the pieces that you've put in place for him, if the fumbles are still there, if he still looks shaky in the pocket and unsure of himself, if he's still a bit wild with his accuracy, then I mean, for Gettleman, he's got to be gone. You can't stick around when you make that decision and it still hasn't worked out. Because Chris, this is a good team. The Giants are not a bad team. This is a team that could easily be 10-6 if the defense, if as you mentioned, if they're able to add pieces in the draft and this defense continues to take steps in the right direction and the offense catches up. This is a team that could get double-digit wins, but it's all going to fall on the arm of Daniel Jones. If he is not the guy that Dave Gettleman thought he was, then come next offseason, both him and Daniel Jones will be out the door.
Absolutely. And I think something to watch for next offseason as well is the 5th-year option on Saquon. That has to be decided, I believe, by the end of this year, at the end of this season, if they're going to pick up the 5th-year option or not. I don't know. He's been hurt. So if he puts together an okay season, are you gonna pick up a 5th-year option on him? Because somebody's gonna pay him if he goes to free agency. No doubt about that. Somebody's gonna pay that guy. I don't know. That's gonna be an interesting one too. And I think that they're close enough to figuring it out and being a 10-win team that it's not worth blowing up. So I think you have to give him the 5th-year option, even though he hasn't proven over a long term right now that he's the gold jacket guy Dave Gettleman drafted him to be.